Hey everyone, if you like the channel, please consider subscribing. It means a ton. Thanks so much. Enjoy the video.
As I was, slowly moving through the forest, burning little energy with my head on a swivel, I happened to notice this maple tree here. And notice how it's got this pretty natural cavity in it where the root ball has been exposed. Now, I'm 6 foot 2 inches tall, so this is a little bit small for me. But if you were a smaller person, you could very easily stuff this little cavity full of debris, wiggle yourself feet first in there. If your head is sticking out a little bit, you could, build a little structure with sticks. So you've got a little bit more of a tunnel, to protect you from the rain. You'd take that stick frame and you would cover it with ferns, and tree boughs, things like that. You've got yourself a good little shelter that's, I would say 75% built. Now, most people, because they trudge through nature the way they do life, they're walking with their head down, they would have walked right by this and not even noticed it. But because I'm scanning my environment in that state of wide-angle vision, because I'm moving slowly, not expending a lot of energy, I was able to notice this. And yeah, it would make a really awesome shelter. Not only that, but as I'm sitting here talking, I noticed there's some stinging nettle, baby stinging nettle growing right here, a delicious edible plant. We have some oxalis, another edible plant growing right here. So if you take the time to truly look upon the natural world through a different lens, you will start to notice all of these things. That, combined with increasing your knowledge base through research, watching classes like this, will be an incredible help to you should you ever find yourself lost in the woods. So we're here at our location where we're going to build our shelter. Keeping in mind the things I said previously about hazards, dead tree branches, all of that stuff. We've got a really nice area here. One other thing I wanted to mention, it's especially crucial in colder weather. If I can help it, I want my shelter to be south-facing, southeast-facing. Because remember, as I said yesterday when I talked about navigating by the sun, in the wintertime, in the northern hemisphere, the sun rises in the southeast. So if my shelter, the entrance to my shelter is facing that southeast direction, I'm going to get that morning sun, which is going to help to warm up the shelter. So just some food for thought, some things to think about. We want to maximize our amount of warmth. Especially if we're lacking in enough clothing and things like that. So yeah, having that southern exposure is a lot nicer than being in a cold, shady area for shelter construction. Along that note, anytime you're going to build the shelter like I'm about to build off a down log, you want to make sure that the log you choose is about, waist high or so on you, and that it is a safe log, meaning that there's no chance it's going to roll over on you in the night. This is a really giant Douglas fir tree that blew over recently, and some pretty gnarly windstorms we had. This thing isn't going anywhere. This is a giant tree. But, smaller trees that you find in the forest, if they've been knocked over by another tree, they could be essentially like a spring-loaded mousetrap. And if you jiggle them too hard and another tree is pinning it down, it can actually cause the tree to flip back up or snap. So anytime I'm going to build this sort of shelter, I take a good amount of time to walk around it and make sure there's no energy stored. Whether it's another tree pinning it over or anything like that. The goal is to build a shelter to keep me alive, not to build a shelter on something that could potentially kill me if another windstorm comes through or something like that. So no matter what we do in a survival situation, our main goals are conserving our energy and not injuring ourselves. Because if we become injured, then we're that much more debilitated. Not only that, serious injury aside, we even want to be careful of things like cuts and scrapes. That's why I highly recommend you always carry a first aid kit, because even the tiniest scrape out here in the wilderness can lead to a serious infection within a few days if it's not properly treated. So if we move slowly, we're deliberate with our movements, we're going to conserve energy, and we're that much less likely to injure ourselves. Done a little bit of collecting and landscaping where my shelter is going to be. A couple reasons why I'm doing that. One is I plan on having a small fire over here. So I want to rake away any debris, anything that could potentially catch fire. If you refer back to the fire section, I'll talk all about fire safety, but I'll also end up having a rock ring here. Before I start construction of the actual roof of the shelter, I need to build my bed first. So as you heard me mention in previous chapters, it's very crucial that anytime we're laying on the ground, even sitting on the ground, that we have some insulation. The earth acts as a heat sink and will slowly sap our body heat away from us. People, when you go camping, you take thermarests or sleeping pads. A lot of people think those are for comfort, when actually that's a secondary concern. The main reason why you're using those is to insulate you from the ground. And being that, we might not have a thermarest or a sleeping pad, we need to build one. Here, I'm going to choose to build mine out of some fir tree boughs that have been blown down in the recent storm. So first what I do is I've kind of laid out and measured my overall height. So I'm just going to build a good thick mattress of these fir boughs to get me up off the ground. Now, is sleeping on a mound of fir boughs going to be as comfortable as a nice inch-thick thermarest? No. Once again, in previous chapter, I referenced dealing with discomfort. We are what we think. If we internally are whining and moaning about how uncomfortable it is, it's going to be that much worse. Being a little bit uncomfortable is better than being dead. So, deal with it. So what I'm going to do is, as I mentioned, I've collected this pile of boughs here. I want to, any of the ones that have, bigger, thicker sticks attached to them, I want to just go ahead and these pull right off. I just want to pull these off the bigger sticks off, because they're not really going to serve a purpose other than to make me uncomfortable. So by taking the time to strip the needle sections off, and I'm going to save these sticks because I'll use those as part of my roofing later. But by pulling the actual smaller branches off, I'm getting those thicker sticks out, which is going to be one less thing that's going to poke me in the back in the middle of the night. So once again, anything that's bigger than about thumb thick, I'm going to try to strip the little branches off and leave the stick behind. Yeah, so I'm just, once again, I've got, my feet are going to be approximately here. My head's going to be approximately up here. So everything in between, and for a good distance out, a little bit wider than my body, I'm going to build up this mattress. If the log you're using has a hollow space underneath it, meaning you can see through to the other side, I might also want to stuff some boughs or dry grass in that crack so that no air comes from the other side of the log. Fortunately, this log is well situated on the ground, so I don't need to worry about that. And as you can see, I'm just kind of stripping them off, laying them down. I'm being slow and deliberate with my movements, because when I rush, I burn more energy. When I rush, I increase my chance of injury. So unless I'm fighting an incoming weather system or the impending dark and I don't have a flashlight, I am going to go slow. Because once again, every precious little bit of energy counts. One thing I will do to make this a tiny bit more comfortable is I'll probably eventually go cut some sword fern to kind of lay on top to be a mattress topper, so to speak. The sword fern's got those nice broad flat leaves, and they will help to even the mattress out, so to speak. And the other thing that's awesome about making a mattress out of fir boughs or cedar boughs is that sap that's in evergreen trees, things like insects don't find it very appealing, that pungent sappy smell. So they will tend to steer clear. On the subject of insects and scorpions, snakes, things like that, if you're building a natural shelter, one idea you're going to have to get used to is potentially sharing your shelter with the more than human world. Our bodies generate heat. Things like reptiles and insects, they are drawn to that heat. So you will have to get used to sharing your shelter. I've spent nights in shelters and woken up to a 6-foot-long pine snake sleeping on my chest because it's nice and warm. I just very gently woke up and moved a little bit, and she just gently slithered off and out of the shelter. Other shelters I've built, I've had squirrels have battles inside of. I've shared shelters with scorpions. It's part of living in nature and understanding that if you appreciate and respect those beings, they will recognize that and not cause you harm. Things like snakes, if you move very quickly, they may strike out of fear of you. But if you're slow and deliberate with your movements, when you're inside your shelter and there's one of those beings in there with you, a lot of times they'll just get the point and move on. But you're using fir or other sappy woods can also inhibit those insects from ever even coming onto it. I have completed my bed. So as you saw, I kind of stripped the bigger branches, the fir needles off the bigger branches. Then on top of that, what I did is went and collected a bunch of sword fern leaves. And you'll notice that I laid the ferns out in kind of a cross-hatch pattern. The reason why I do that as opposed to just laying them all, this way or this way, is by doing the cross-hatch, it helps to better kind of distribute my weight and makes for an overall, more comfortable natural bed. It's going to be that much more comfortable. One thing about natural mattresses, if you find yourself in a long-term survival situation, or you're just, had it with society and you plan on living in the woods forever, you will have to pretty regularly add new material to your bed. as these needles, fir needles die and dry out, and I sleep on it, it's going to keep getting more and more compressed. So I will occasionally add new materials to it just to keep that layer of insulation. Eventually I may need to completely remove everything if it gets wet for some reason. I don't want mold in there, and completely redo the bed. They found a cave in South Africa that had been used over the course of 100,000 years. And there was a large mattress in the back corner of this cave. And when they started to analyze it, they realized that peoples over the course of 50,000 plus years had just been perpetually adding to this giant, family-sized mattress of debris in the back corner of the cave. So yeah, by, constantly making sure we've got a good separation between us and the ground, adding to it occasionally, you're going to be that much better off. As I'm building it, I will occasionally lay on it, see if there's any sticks poking me in the back. If so, I'll shift those around and go from there. But yeah, so I think we're done with the bed for now. I've got it good, I would say, 6 to 8 inches off of the ground, and I'm ready to start putting the roofing on this shelter. So now that we've got our bed complete, we know it's comfortable enough. Now we're going to start laying our roofing. So, the goal of a shelter is to shelter us, to protect us from rain, protect us from sun even. So when I collect my roofing, I first want to size it based off the diameter of the log I'm working with. So being that this log is pretty tall, I need my roofing to be a few feet long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start where my feet are, and I'm going to start laying my, my rafters, so to speak. And I want to make sure that they are, flush, just about flush with the top of the log. I don't want them sticking over too much, because if it rains, rain can run down those rafters, get under the roofing that I'm going to put on it. So yeah, I just want to have enough room in there so I can fit in there comfortably. I can pull whatever gear I have inside with me to also protect that from the weather. And then have a little bit of room to be able to roll over and things like that. So I always start at the feet end, because that's where I'm going to need the less amount of space, and I'm going to work my way up towards the head. Yeah, one other thing is, as I'm laying my roofing, I'm going to try to get those roof rafters as close as I can together. And sometimes it could be a bit of a puzzle trying to find ones that fit together nicely, because I want there to be as little gaps between my rafters as possible. Before I lay the roofing on, I'll probably come back over and with some smaller sticks do a little bit of cross hatching as well, just to give myself a nice uniform slope to my roof. I've got my main beams, so to speak, my main rafters complete. Notice how near the end where my feet are going to be, I kind of wrap them around. The goal with any shelter that you build naturally is you want it to be a tight fit, because heat rises. We're used to living in these houses that have nice tall ceilings. That's great when you've got insulation and an internal heating system. But if you don't, you want to keep it small, because we want to trap all that heat that our body's going to be generating, or that our fire pit is going to radiate into the log and into the shelter. Or if we decide to bring some warm rocks in to keep us warm throughout the night, we want to trap that heat. So it is going to be a bit of a tight fit. That's another thing you're going to have to get used to. If you're a claustrophobic person, I suggest you start working on that, because we want our natural shelters to be a tight fit. There's just no way around it. especially if it's winter time, and our goal with the shelter is to keep us warm as well as keep us dry. So now that I've got my main rafters complete, I'm gonna kind of go back over it with some smaller sticks and just fill in the holes, fill in some of the bigger gaps. And that's why I saved a lot of the branches that I pulled stuff from my bedding off from, is I can now go back with these, and I'm gonna save these little fir sprigs for my roofing. But with these smaller sticks, I can now go back and lay them in between any of the bigger gaps that I see. Oops. After I kind of go back and lay these smaller sticks, I will then take another group of smaller sticks and lay some kind of crossways. It's going to help to bear the weight of my roofing material, whether that's, fir boughs and ferns or moss or bark slabs. And it's just going to make the whole structure that much better and tighter and less liable to shift if I happen to roll over abruptly in the night and bump into it. So yeah, I'm just going back over, trying to, any of those little gaps that I see, I want to plug with smaller sticks. And once I get those satisfactorily plugged, I will then start to put my roofing on. We are finished with our the structure of the roof, and now it's time to start covering it. So what you cover your roof with depends on what you have available. Because of the recent storm, we have all these fir boughs that were down on the ground. And even if there weren't a storm, this would still be my preferred type of shelter for the Pacific Northwest, where there's not a lot of deciduous leaf matter on the ground. Here it's mostly evergreen trees. It's not like the East Coast where in the fall we've got a ton of that leaf litter. So we have to make do. So I am going to start to, we'll call it shingling the roof. So just like shingles on your house, the goal is to have them overlap in such a way so that when water runs down them, there's no gaps. So we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up towards the top. Since our primary roof covering is going to be these fir branches, I want to lay them kind of opposite of the way they would grow. Well, not really opposite, but typically on fir trees, the branches do kind of swoop out low, and the needles would be pointing up. I want the needles pointing down so they shed water this way. If I put them on this way, water is going to bind up in there and could potentially turn into bigger drops and seep through. But if I have it this way, water is going to kind of slough down it. It's a much path of least resistance for water. And as I said, I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to work my way up. So after I get these boughs on, I could then, cover it with some sword ferns. If I could find enough moss, I could potentially do a layer of moss. And I'll also show you, happen to have some bark that we found in the woods, and some left over from some firewood splitting. We could even do some bark shingles if we can easily access a bunch of tree bark. So the goal of our roof is to keep heat in and keep moisture out. So starting now, I'm going to start at the bottom. Some of the sticks I'll leave kind of long. Others I'll just kind of trim as I go. My goal is to cover it to where when I'm inside the shelter, I can't see any light poking out, I can't see out of it or into it. I want to make sure that I'm shielded from the rain. Is pretty much complete. I could always add some more. In the natural shelter world, there's no such thing as too much of anything. The more roofing material I put on, the more weatherproof it's going to be. The same is true with my bedding. The more bedding I put in, the more insulated from the ground I'll be. So don't worry about too much. I wanted to talk about a few alternative sources that you might have access to. One of the main principles of shelter building is that you study what materials you have available to you. If you're in an area where there's lots of tall grasses, I would use bundles of grasses, like I have here. And granted, it's early spring, so the grasses haven't started to grow yet. But if it were early fall, the field behind us that you can't see would be full of, decent-sized tall grasses. So I would take time to collect a whole giant pile of grass. And just like I shingled this from the bottom up, I would do the same with my piles of grass. If I wanted to take it a step further, and I had a bunch of paracord on me, I could strip out the white strands from the inner core of that paracord and actually bind these bundles together and lay them on like that. Or you could just lay them on like so. One other thing with roofing materials, using living tree boughs like this, they're pretty sturdy, but if I'm using debris or grass, my final step would be to cover it with some lattice work sticks to keep wind from blowing it off. So it's just, you study what you have available and you utilize it. So earlier on, I mentioned bark. And, we just happened to, because of the windstorm, had a bunch of trees come down, and through kind of making firewood, we ended up with some bark. So there are plenty of instances in woodlands where you can find a tree that's fallen over, it's slightly rotted, and you can really easily pull large chunks of bark off. So with bark, as I mentioned, shingling, starting from the bottom up, we would do the same thing. So just a quick demonstration here, start at the bottom, and my next one goes there. Oops. Next one goes here. Sometimes you gotta kind of Lego it, get them to work together. That's why I prefer stripping the bark off naturally as opposed to this nice even angle cut stuff that you get with a chainsaw. It's much easier actually to get it to stack when they're kind of jagged pieces of bark. So you can see here that, when I harvest bark in the wild, I can harvest much longer pieces and big strips. And if I find the right tree, I could collect enough bark to shingle this whole shelter in much less time than it took me to collect all these boughs that got blown down in the last windstorm. So that's another potential option, is bark. Sometimes you're going to use a multitude of things. Sometimes you might use a combination of boughs and ferns and bark. Sometimes you might use a combination of grass and leaf litter if you're in a more deciduous forest region. It really, once again, we use our heightened awareness skills to pay attention to what's available, and we utilize it. So in my early chapters, when I talked about things that everybody should carry with them, one of the things I talked about that you should carry at least 3 or 4 in your pack are these survival blankets. You know, these are essentially 48 inch by 72 inch Mylar sheet. It's hard to stare at with the sun reflecting off of it. Anyway, what I could do with this, if I have several of these, one of them I could use to wrap myself with inside my shelter. That's going to keep me warm. Another one I could use for capturing rain and filtering it, or not filtering it, but funneling it into a container. And if I've got a few, I could actually use a few of these to roof my shelter with, or put over top of my debris. Not only is that going to keep rain off me, but if people are looking for me from helicopter or with drones, this stands out like a sore thumb. Could be spotted miles off. So that's silver. Silver reflects heat and light. If we wrap ourselves in it, it keeps our body heat close to us, but we can also use it as a signal, something to signal with. We could also tie it up and use it to capture rainwater. So simple, cheap thing that has many, many uses.